Episode, we're going to focus on the anatomy of controls. So InSpec expresses its expectations about the desired state of the system through resources inside of these controls that we define. Now let's first look at resources, because resources have a lot of default parameters, optional parameters, and a bunch of other different features about it where you can filter on them. So first, let's look at the SSHD config file. Has a default path specified and stored inside of an instance variable inside of it. So this is something that's not very easy to get to, but here I'm going to use a Ruby method called instance variable get and then specify the name of that instance variable to retrieve the value. Now I'm not suggesting you do that, but I'm just showing you how you might find the default path. Now, let's define a new SSHD config resource, but this time we're going to override the path, or at least specify a path when the resource is created. So in this moment, I've specified the new one, and I'm going to retrieve the instance variable from this just to show you that the path happens to be different. Now, of course, we don't have any configuration there at that specified path, but if we had a special system that needed that path, we could. Here, we're going to use the yum resource, and the yum resource has the repos method, which allows us to see all the repositories that it can connect to for data and packages. So here I'm going to run yum.repo to specify a particular repo. So I'm filtering on that repo. And now with that resource, I can ask questions like, does it exist? Is it enabled? And where is the base URL of it? Another resource we can take a look at is the HTTP resource. We can use it to connect to our local system or any remote target as well from essentially where we are executing. Here we see that when we define it, it assumes a number of default values for us. In this case, besides the URL, it assumes we're using a GET request. It might also be assuming whether SSL is being verified, or if we had some login, name and value parameters and things like that we might want to specify. So we could change this method to a post, a put, a delete, or some other operation. We may turn off SSL verify or ensure that it is enabled. We can then look at the status of that response in our resource and then make some assertions about that when we finally define our controls. The cron tab resource assumes if you don't give it a username, your default user, the current user you're in at the moment. In this case, that would be the root user. But this system has a number of cron tasks set up for the chef user. So I'm going to make sure that I override that default value with the chef user. And you can see I use the properties entries to see those values. However, you might be interested in searching or filtering on something like the entries that happen to have an hour specified as 0. And you can see here that this is going to return me the exact same set. But if I had a larger set of cron tasks, essentially I would see a smaller subset of that information. So as we saw, resources have default values that we can oftentimes override. There's also optional values and additional parameters we can specify. Controls in InSpec express the state of the resources on our system, and we can look at various things like the properties, its conditions, matchers, and expected values. Let's examine the components of a control using a package resource as an example. Here we'll use the git package, which maps to the git package that's installed inside of this system. Well, we can see that it's installed and it has a version, but none of those things are executed like a control. To do that, we need to place it into a describe block. So this describe block says we are going to describe characteristics about it. Then we can define individual tests. It should be installed. And then we close that block with an end. Now we can also look at multiple things, multiple essential tests inside of a describe block. Here, we're going to look at the git package again. We're going to verify that it happens to be installed. And we're also going to make sure that the version compares correctly to the version that we expect. Now, a lot of times you're not going to want to define them inside of InSpec shell. This is just a good place to explore it. You'll want to move these controls into your own files. And there's a lot of different ways in which these controls are defined with these properties, as you see here. We saw this with our yum repo, our cron tab, our package with its version, and things like that. We also saw conditions. We can see positive or negative conditions, should or should not. And we also have our matchers, which is stating whether something matches this, it exists, it should be enabled, if it's equal to, if it compares to that value, if it includes that value. We also see the expected results, what we hope it would equal out to. If you'd like to learn more about controls, check out other videos in this series, our docs, or our tutorials.